Lieutenant Sarah Ghost Martinez had earned her nickname through years of silent, deadly precision. At 28, she was one of only a handful of women to complete the grueling Navy SEAL training program. Her compact frame, standing barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, often fooled people into underestimating her capabilities. This misconception had saved her life more times than she could count during her 3 deployments overseas. The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Sarah walked toward the equipment storage facility. She had been temporarily assigned to the Marine base for a joint training exercise that would begin the following week. The brass wanted to test new combat scenarios involving both SEAL and Marine units working together in urban warfare situations. Sarah's duffel bag contained her personal gear, including her customized Sig Sauer P226 and her beloved K-bar knife that had been with her through every mission. She also carried a small backpack with her laptop, encrypted communication devices, and several $1,000s in cash that she planned to deposit at the base bank later that afternoon. The money represented her combat pay from her last deployment, and she was saving it for her younger brother's college tuition. As she approached the storage building, Sarah noticed 3 Marines standing near the entrance. They wore standard desert camouflage uniforms, but something about their posture immediately put her on alert. Years of combat experience had taught her to read body language like a survival manual, and these men were displaying classic predatory behavior. The tallest of the 3, a sergeant with a scar running down his left cheek, stepped forward as Sarah reached the door. His name tag read Williams, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone accustomed to taking what he wanted through intimidation. Well, what do we have here?" Williams said, blocking Sarah's path to the entrance. "You lost, sweetheart. The nurse's station is about 2 buildings over." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she was already assessing threats and escape routes. "Excuse me, Sergeant. I need to access the storage facility." Williams laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Storage facility? This is a restricted area, darling. Only authorized personnel allowed." He gestured to his companions, who moved to flank Sarah on either side. "I'm going to need to see some identification and maybe search that bag of yours." The Marine to Sarah's left, a corporal named Jensen according to his uniform, grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Yeah, could be carrying contraband. We take base security very seriously around here." Sarah slowly reached for her identification, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She handed her military ID to Williams, who barely glanced at it before passing it to Jensen. "Navy, huh?" Williams said, stepping closer. "You're a long way from the ocean, sailor girl. What's a squid doing on our base?" "Joint training exercise," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm here for the urban warfare simulations next week." The 3rd Marine, a young private whose nervous energy suggested he was new to this kind of activity, shifted uncomfortably. "Sarge, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Rodriguez," Williams snapped. "I'm conducting official base security here." He turned back to Sarah with a predatory smile. "Now, about that bag search. Base protocol requires random inspections of all non-Marine personnel." Sarah knew this was completely false. She had been briefed extensively on base protocols before her arrival, and random searches required proper authorization and witnesses. These men were clearly planning something illegal, and her bag full of expensive equipment and cash had apparently caught their attention somehow. "I'd be happy to comply with an official search," Sarah said evenly. "Should we head to the MP station so you can file the proper paperwork?" Williams's smile faltered slightly. "That won't be necessary. We can handle this right here." He gestured toward a side alley between buildings that was hidden from view of the main walkways. "Just step over there, and we'll get this sorted out real quick." Sarah's tactical mind immediately recognized the setup. The alley would provide concealment for whatever these Marines had planned, whether it was simple theft or something worse. She had encountered similar situations during her deployments, where soldiers had attempted to rob local civilians or even fellow service members. The isolation, the false authority, the intimidation tactics, it all followed a predictable pattern. "I prefer to conduct official business in official locations," Sarah said, making no move toward the alley. "If you need to search my belongings, we should do it properly." Jensen stepped closer, his hand resting conspicuously on his sidearm. The sergeant gave you an order, Navy. We don't like it when people don't follow orders around here. Sarah noticed several important details in quick succession. Jensen's holster snap was undone, suggesting he was prepared to draw his weapon quickly. Rodriguez kept glancing nervously toward the main walkway, clearly watching for witnesses. Williams had positioned himself to block her most direct escape route back toward the populated areas of the base. Most importantly, none of them seemed to have recognized what unit she belonged to or understood her actual capabilities. To them, she was just another female service member who could be easily intimidated and victimized. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice taking on a slightly harder edge, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not just Navy. I'm a Navy SEAL, and I'm asking you one more time to step aside." Williams laughed outright. "A SEAL? Right. And I'm the commandant of the Marine Corps. Come on, boys. Little Navy girl here thinks she's some kind of tough guy." Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same mental state that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations overseas. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate decreased, and her awareness expanded to take in every detail of her environment. She noted the wind direction, the shadows cast by nearby buildings, the texture of the ground beneath her feet, and the exact positions of all three Marines. "Last chance," Sarah said quietly. Williams stepped forward aggressively, reaching for her duffel bag. "Hand it over, Navy girl. We'll give it back after we make sure you're not carrying anything dangerous." Sarah's response was lightning fast and precisely calculated. She dropped into a low crouch, using her center of gravity to her advantage as she swept Williams's legs out from under him. As he fell backward, she rose and delivered a controlled strike to his solar plexus that left him gasping on the ground. Jensen fumbled for his sidearm, but Sarah had anticipated this response. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, grabbed his wrist, and applied a joint lock that forced him to release his weapon. A follow-up elbow strike to his temple dropped him beside Williams. Rodriguez, seeing his companions neutralized in less than 5 seconds, raised his hands and backed away. Whoa, I didn't want any part of this anyway." Sarah picked up Jensen's dropped pistol and quickly checked to ensure the safety was engaged before tucking it into her belt. She looked down at Williams, who was slowly recovering his breath and staring at her with a mixture of shock and rage. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death command decisions. "You three are going to explain to me exactly what you thought you were doing, and then we're all going to take a walk to see your commanding officer." Williams struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "You can't do this. We're Marines. You assaulted Marines. I defended myself against 3 service members who were attempting to rob me," Sarah corrected. "There's a significant difference, and I have the training records to prove I used the minimum force necessary." Jensen groaned as he sat up, holding his head. "Sarge, I think she broke something." "You'll be fine," Sarah said without sympathy. "Mild concussion at worst. You'll have a headache for a few hours, and hopefully a lesson that lasts longer." She pulled out her secure satellite phone, a device that immediately caught the attention of all 3 Marines. Only personnel with very high security clearances carried that kind of equipment, and it was becoming clear that they had made a serious mistake in targeting her. "I'm calling this in," Sarah announced. "My commanding officer is going to want a full report, and I suspect your commanding officer will too." Williams held up his hand. Wait. Maybe we can work something out here. No need to involve the brass." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Work something out? You mean like covering up an attempted robbery and assault?" "That's not how I operate, Sergeant." Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I swear I didn't know what they were planning. They just told me we were going to check someone's identification. I'm new here. I don't know all the protocols yet." Sarah studied the young private's face and saw genuine fear and confusion. She had been in the military long enough to recognize the difference between criminal intent and someone who had been manipulated by more experienced personnel. "What's your story, Private Rodriguez?" she asked. "I've only been stationed here for 2 weeks, ma'am. Sergeant Williams told me and some other new guys that we needed to help with random security checks. He said it was part of our training rotation." Sarah turned her attention back to Williams, who was looking increasingly desperate. Random security checks? Is that what you're calling it? Look, SEAL, or whatever you are, Williams said. You don't understand how things work around here. There are unofficial protocols, ways we handle situations that might not be in the manual. Unofficial protocols for robbing fellow service members. Sarah's voice was ice cold. Tell me, Sergeant Williams, how many other people have you subjected to these unofficial protocols? Jensen and Williams exchanged a look that told Sarah everything she needed to know. This was not their first attempt at this kind of theft, and they had probably been successful before when targeting victims they perceived as vulnerable. Her satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message, and she glanced down to see a text from her commanding officer asking for a status update on her arrival at Camp Pendleton. The timing was perfect. Gentlemen, Sarah said, my CO is expecting a report. I can either tell him that my arrival went smoothly, or I can tell him that I was assaulted by Marines attempting to rob me on his base. The choice is yours, but you have about 30 seconds to convince me that you deserve the first option. The three Marines looked at each other with growing panic. They were beginning to understand that they had targeted someone far more dangerous and well-connected than they had anticipated. Williams cleared his throat. What do you want? I want the truth. How many times have you done this? Who else was involved? And what happened to the money and equipment you stole from other victims? The questions hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could see the wheels turning in Williams's head as he tried to calculate his options. She had him cornered, and they both knew it. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the main walkway, and all four of them turned to see a group of Marine officers heading in their direction. Sarah recognized the insignia of a lieutenant colonel among the group, and she realized that their confrontation was about to become much more official than any of them had planned. Time was running out for Williams to make his choice, and Sarah prepared herself for whatever came next. She had dealt with corrupt soldiers before, both in combat zones and on bases, and she knew that the next few minutes would determine whether this situation ended with justice or cover-up. The lieutenant colonel was getting closer, and Sarah could see that he had noticed the tense scene playing out near the storage facility. In a few more seconds, she would have to make her own choice about how to handle the situation. Williams looked desperately at his companions, then back at Sarah. Okay, he whispered urgently. I'll tell you everything. Just don't call this in. Sarah smiled grimly. Start talking, Sergeant. And it better be the truth. Williams glanced nervously at the approaching officers and spoke quickly in hushed tones. There have been maybe 6 or 7 incidents over the past 4 months. We targeted people we thought would be easy marks, new transfers, support personnel, anyone who looked like they might not fight back or report it. Sarah's jaw tightened. What kind of amounts are we talking about? Usually just whatever cash they had on them, maybe some electronics, Jensen added, clearly hoping that cooperation would reduce his punishment. Nothing too big that would trigger major investigations. Too big. Sarah's voice carried a dangerous edge. You're talking about stealing from your fellow service members like it's a business decision. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the senior officer Sarah had spotted, was now close enough that she could make out his features. He was scanning the area with the practiced eye of someone who had seen enough military life to recognize trouble when he saw it. Rodriguez shifted nervously. Ma'am, I swear I only participated in one incident, and I gave the money back afterward. I couldn't sleep knowing I'd stolen from someone. Williams shot the private a murderous look. Shut up, Rodriguez. You're making things worse. Worse than attempted robbery and conspiracy? Sarah asked. Private Rodriguez, what happened to the money you gave back? There was this Air Force tech sergeant who had just arrived for temporary duty, Rodriguez explained rapidly. They told me she was carrying sensitive equipment that needed to be inspected, but when we got her isolated, Sergeant Williams just took her wallet and grabbed her laptop bag. Sarah felt sick. What happened to the tech sergeant? She reported it, but Williams had already planted some contraband in her quarters, Jensen said, apparently deciding that honesty was his best option now. Made it look like she was involved in something illegal. The investigation got buried when she was transferred out suddenly. You framed her to cover up your theft, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had stopped about 50 feet away and was now clearly observing their conversation. Sarah realized she had only moments before the situation would escalate beyond her control. Here's what's going to happen, she said firmly. You're all going to return every cent you've stolen, and you're going to provide me with a complete list of victims. Then, we're going to figure out how to make this right. Williams laughed bitterly. And what if we refuse? You going to beat up the whole Marine Corps? Sarah smiled coldly. Sergeant Williams, let me explain something to you. I've spent the last 5 years hunting terrorists in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I've called in airstrikes, coordinated with international special forces, and briefed generals and admirals on classified operations. You think 3 Marines with a theft problem are beyond my capabilities? She pulled out her satellite phone again, this time opening her contact list where Williams could see it. The list included direct lines to Pentagon officials, SEAL team commanders, and other high-ranking military personnel. One phone call, Sarah continued, and this becomes a federal investigation involving NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigation Service, and possibly military intelligence. Your careers won't just be over. You'll be facing federal charges and military prison time. Jensen paled visibly. She's not bluffing, Sarge. That's real government-issue communication equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had apparently seen enough of their suspicious gathering and was now walking directly toward them with purpose. Sarah made a quick decision. Attention, she called out sharply. The 3 Marines automatically snapped to attention, their military training overriding their criminal instincts. Sarah maintained her relaxed posture, but positioned herself to address the approaching officer. Lieutenant Colonel, Sarah said as Harrison reached their group. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Command. I was just having a discussion with these Marines about base security protocols. Harrison's eyes took in the scene quickly. 3 Marines at attention, one dropped pistol that Sarah had placed on the ground nearby, and the general atmosphere of tension. He was clearly a smart officer who recognized that something significant had just occurred. Lieutenant Martinez, Harrison said formally. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Harrison, Base Security Commander. Is there something I should know about these security protocols? Sarah looked at Williams, giving him one final chance to come clean. The sergeant's face was a mask of barely controlled panic, but he remained silent. Sir, Sarah said, these 3 Marines approached me claiming they needed to conduct a random search of my belongings and equipment. When I questioned the legality of their request, the situation became confrontational. Harrison's expression darkened. Random search? Sergeant Williams, by whose authority were you conducting random searches? Williams struggled to find words. Sir, we thought, base security requires. Base security requires proper authorization, proper witnesses, and proper documentation. Harrison cut him off. None of which I see here. He turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, were you threatened or assaulted in any way? Sarah considered her answer carefully. She could end this right now with serious charges that would destroy all 3 Marines' careers, or she could try to handle it in a way that might actually create positive change. Sir, I believe there may have been some confusion about proper procedures, she said diplomatically. Perhaps this would be better addressed through appropriate command channels. Harrison studied her face, clearly understanding that she was choosing to de-escalate rather than pursue maximum punishment. I see. Sergeant Williams, you and your men will report to my office in 1 hour for a complete briefing on proper search procedures. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Williams managed. Dismissed, Harrison ordered. The 3 Marines saluted and began to walk away, but Sarah called out softly, Sergeant Williams. He stopped and turned back, fear evident in his eyes. 1 hour after your meeting with the colonel, Sarah said quietly, meet me at Building C7. Come alone, and bring everything you mentioned in our conversation. Williams nodded reluctantly and continued walking with his companions. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison waited until the Marines were out of earshot before turning back to Sarah. Lieutenant, I've been running security on this base for 3 years. Nothing happens here without my knowledge, and I can tell when someone is being diplomatic about serious misconduct. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Sir, I believe in handling problems at the lowest appropriate level whenever possible. Admirable, Harrison said. But if these Marines have been conducting unauthorized searches, that's a pattern that needs to be investigated properly. This could involve theft, abuse of authority, or worse. I agree completely, sir, Sarah said, which is why I plan to gather complete information before making any formal reports. Sometimes the direct approach yields better results than immediate escalation. Harrison nodded slowly. You're talking about giving them a chance to come clean voluntarily. Yes, sir. And if they don't take that chance, then we proceed with formal charges that will stick properly. Very well, Lieutenant. But I want to be briefed on whatever you discover. These kinds of problems can spread if they're not handled decisively. Understood, sir. You'll have a full report within 24 hours. After Harrison left, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She had managed to prevent an immediate escalation while preserving her options for later action. Now she needed to decide how to handle the meeting with Williams. She walked to Building C7, which she had chosen because it housed the base legal offices. If Williams was going to come clean about their theft ring, she wanted it to happen somewhere that official action could be taken immediately if necessary. An hour later, Williams appeared at the designated meeting point looking like a man heading to his own execution. He carried a small duffel bag and kept glancing around nervously as if expecting military police to appear at any moment. You came alone, Sarah observed. Good choice. Look, SEAL lady, Williams said. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you need to understand that you're messing with people who have connections on this base. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Connections? Sergeant, I just had a very pleasant conversation with the base security commander. Are your connections more substantial than his? Williams shifted uncomfortably. There are people in the supply chain, logistics officers who help us identify good targets. People who tip us off about who's carrying valuable equipment or large amounts of cash. This was worse than Sarah had expected. You're telling me there's an organized network of people involved in this? Not organized exactly, Williams said quickly. More like mutual benefit arrangements. Someone in supply tells us when a new person arrives with expensive gear, and we split whatever we recover. Recover, Sarah repeated. Is that what you call stealing? Williams opened his duffel bag and pulled out several items, laptops, smartphones, cameras, and bundles of cash. This is everything from the last 2 months. The older stuff got sold already. Sarah looked at the collection of stolen goods and felt her anger rising again. How many people have you victimized, Williams? I told you, maybe 6 or 7 over the past few months. But it's not like we hurt anybody. We just took stuff they could afford to lose. Stuff they could afford to lose? Sarah's voice was incredulous. You stole someone's combat pay. You took equipment that people need to do their jobs. You violated the trust that's supposed to exist between service members. Williams was starting to look desperate again. What do you want? You want me to confess? You want me to name names? What's it going to take to make this go away? Sarah considered her options. She could turn Williams over to military police right now with a bag full of evidence, which would certainly result in his court-martial and imprisonment. Or she could try to use him to uncover the larger network of corruption he had described. I want a complete list of everyone involved, she said finally. Not just the people who helped you identify targets, but everyone who knew what you were doing and didn't report it. Williams pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. I figured you'd want this. It's not complete, but it's everyone I can remember. Sarah took the paper and scanned the names. There were 8 people listed, including ranks and unit assignments. Several were in positions that would give them access to personnel records and equipment manifests. This staff sergeant in logistics, Sarah said, pointing to one name. He's been feeding you information about incoming personnel? Staff Sergeant Murphy, yeah? He's got access to transfer orders and equipment inventories. He tells us when someone interesting is coming in. And, in exchange, you give him a cut of what you steal. Usually about 20%, Williams admitted. Sarah folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Sergeant Williams, you're going to help me end this network. Williams shook his head vigorously. No way. I'm not ratting out people who could make my life hell on this base. Your life is already hell, Sarah pointed out. The only question is whether you're going to prison as a thief or whether you're going to help clean up this mess and maybe salvage something from your career. She pulled out her satellite phone again. I can have Naval Criminal Investigation Service here within 2 hours. They'll arrest everyone on this list and conduct a full investigation that will probably uncover even more corruption than you've told me about. Williams stared at the phone with obvious fear. What would you want me to do? Help me gather evidence against the real leaders of this operation, Sarah said. You're obviously not the brains behind this scheme. Someone with more experience and higher rank set this up and recruited you to do the dirty work." Williams was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. "If I help you, what guarantee do I have that I won't end up in prison anyway?" "You don't have any guarantees," Sarah said bluntly. "But right now, you have a choice between definitely going to prison or possibly having a chance to make things right." She could see him struggling with the decision, and she decided to push a little harder. "Think about the people you've hurt, Williams. That Air Force tech sergeant you framed, her career might be ruined because of what you did. The other victims who lost money they needed, equipment they depended on. Don't you think they deserve justice?" Williams closed his eyes. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll help. But I want it on record that I cooperated voluntarily." Sarah nodded. "That will definitely be noted in my report. Now, tell me about Staff Sergeant Murphy and how this whole system really works." As Williams began to explain the details of the theft network, Sarah realized that she had uncovered something much larger and more serious than a simple robbery attempt. This was organized corruption that threatened the integrity of the entire base, and stopping it was going to require careful planning and considerable risk. But as she listened to Williams describe the full scope of the criminal activity, Sarah felt the familiar sense of purpose that had driven her through every dangerous mission she had completed. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been trained to handle, and she was going to see it through to the end. Williams spent the next hour detailing the corruption network that had been operating on Camp Pendleton for nearly a year. As he talked, Sarah began to understand that the theft operation was far more sophisticated than she had initially realized. "Staff Sergeant Murphy isn't just feeding us information," Williams explained. "He's actually coordinating with people at other bases to set up situations where valuable equipment gets lost during transfers. Then, it gets sold through civilian contacts off base." Sarah took detailed notes on her encrypted tablet. "How many other bases are involved?" "At least 3 that I know of: Camp Lejeune, 29 Palms, and somewhere up in Washington State. Murphy has contacts at all of them." "And the stolen equipment ends up where?" Williams shifted uncomfortably. "There's this guy in San Diego who runs what looks like a legitimate military surplus store. But he's actually laundering stolen gear through fake paperwork that makes it look like legitimate military surplus sales." Sarah realized she was looking at a multi-state criminal enterprise that had infiltrated multiple military installations. This was far beyond what she could handle alone, and it was definitely beyond what could be resolved through informal channels. "Williams," she said, "I'm going to need you to help me set up a meeting with Murphy. We need to catch him in the act of providing information about incoming personnel." Williams looked terrified. "He'll know something's wrong if I suddenly start asking different kinds of questions." "Not different questions," Sarah corrected. "Just more specific ones. I need you to find out exactly how he gets his information, who else is involved in the chain, and when the next planned theft is supposed to happen." She pulled out the list of stolen items Williams had provided. "We also need to return all of this to the rightful owners, and that means identifying who they belonged to originally. Some of that stuff has been sitting in Murphy's storage locker for weeks," Williams said. "I don't even remember who we took it from." "Then, we're going to have to figure it out," Sarah said firmly. "Every single item needs to be returned, and every victim needs to know that justice is being served." Williams spent another 20 minutes providing details about the storage locations, the civilian fence in San Diego, and the schedule of planned operations. Sarah compiled everything into a comprehensive intelligence report that would allow military investigators to dismantle the entire network. "What happens now?" Williams asked when he finished talking. "Now we're going to set up a controlled operation to catch Murphy and his associates in the act," Sarah said. "And you're going to be the bait." Williams paled. "Bait? What do you mean, bait?" "You're going to tell Murphy that you've identified a high-value target for the next theft operation. Someone with expensive equipment and a large amount of cash who fits their usual victim profile." "And who would that be?" Sarah smiled grimly. "Me." The plan Sarah outlined was both elegant and dangerous. Williams would approach Murphy with information about a new Navy SEAL who had arrived on base carrying specialized communication equipment and a large amount of cash. Murphy would presumably follow his usual pattern of gathering more intelligence and setting up the theft operation. Meanwhile, Sarah would coordinate with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison and Naval Criminal Investigation Service to set up surveillance and evidence-gathering operations that would capture the entire network in action. The key, Sarah explained to Williams, is that you need to act completely normal. Don't change your behavior, don't ask unusual questions, and don't give any indication that you're cooperating with an investigation. Williams nodded nervously. What if Murphy suspects something? These guys aren't stupid, and they're paranoid about security. If Murphy suspects anything, he'll probably just cancel the operation and disappear, Sarah said. Which means we lose our chance to catch the whole network. That's why your performance has to be perfect. She handed Williams a piece of paper with detailed information about her fictitious vulnerabilities. This is your script. I'm supposedly carrying $10,000 in cash that I'm planning to deposit at the base bank next week. I also have specialized SEAL communication equipment worth about $50,000. That seems like a lot even for Murphy's standards, Williams observed. Exactly. It's the kind of score that will make him want to move quickly and involve all his key associates. We want to make this too tempting to resist. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon coordinating with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison and the base security office. Harrison was initially skeptical about using Williams as an asset rather than simply arresting him, but Sarah convinced him that the intelligence value outweighed the risks. Lieutenant, Harrison said, I've dealt with military corruption cases before, and they usually involve small-scale theft or minor abuse of authority. What you're describing sounds like organized crime. Yes, sir. That's exactly what it is. And organized crime requires an organized response. Harrison agreed to provide covert surveillance support and to coordinate with NCIS agents who could handle the federal aspects of the investigation. He also arranged for military police to be positioned strategically around the base in case the operation went wrong. That evening, Williams approached Staff Sergeant Murphy at the Non-Commissioned Officers Club, where Murphy regularly spent his off-duty time. Sarah watched from across the room, using her training in surveillance and counter-surveillance to observe the interaction without being detected. Murphy was a thin, nervous-looking man in his early 30s who kept checking his smartphone throughout his conversation with Williams. Sarah could see him becoming increasingly animated as Williams described the fictional high-value target. After about 15 minutes, Murphy left the club and Williams approached Sarah's table. He's interested, Williams reported quietly. Really interested. He wants to meet with his contacts tomorrow to plan the operation. What kind of timeline is he thinking? He wants to move fast. Probably sometime this weekend when there are fewer people around to witness anything. Sarah nodded. This was perfect timing because it would give NCIS agents enough time to arrive and set up their surveillance operation, but not enough time for Murphy to conduct extensive background research that might reveal her true identity and capabilities. The next morning, Sarah met with two NCIS agents who had driven up from San Diego overnight. Agent Rebecca Chun was a veteran investigator with 15 years of experience in military corruption cases, while Agent David Santos specialized in organized crime and money laundering operations. Lieutenant Martinez, Agent Chun said, "Your intelligence report is the most comprehensive analysis of this type of criminal network that we've seen in years. How did you manage to gather all this information in less than 24 hours? Good timing and better training," Sarah replied. Plus, Williams was scared enough to be completely honest about everything he knew. Agent Santos reviewed the list of suspects and locations. If half of this information is accurate, we're looking at a criminal enterprise that's stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment and cash over the past year. It's all accurate, Sarah assured him. Williams knows that his only chance of avoiding a long prison sentence is complete cooperation. The agents explained their surveillance plan. They would monitor all the key suspects using electronic surveillance and physical observation teams. When Murphy and his associates moved to steal Sarah's fictitious equipment and cash, they would be arrested with overwhelming evidence of their criminal activity. What about Williams? Agent Chen asked. Once we arrest Murphy, Williams becomes a key witness who might be in danger from the other members of the network. Sarah had already considered this problem. Williams will be taken into protective custody immediately after Murphy's arrest. He'll be held in the base detention facility until he can testify against the other conspirators. Agent Santos looked concerned. And what about your safety, Lieutenant? If this operation goes wrong, you could be facing multiple armed suspects in an isolated location. Sarah smiled confidently. Agent Santos, I've been in much more dangerous situations than dealing with a few corrupt Marines. But I appreciate the concern. The operation was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, when base activity would be at its lowest point. Murphy had arranged for Sarah to be approached near the equipment storage facility where she had first encountered Williams and his associates. Friday evening, Williams provided the final intelligence update. Murphy had recruited 2 additional Marines to help with the theft, and he had arranged for a civilian truck to be waiting outside the base perimeter to transport the stolen equipment immediately off the installation. He's really going all out for this one, Williams reported. He thinks this is the biggest score they've ever attempted. Perfect, Sarah said. The bigger the operation, the more evidence we'll have against all of them. Saturday morning, Sarah conducted a final equipment check with the NCIS agents. She would be wearing a concealed recording device and a GPS tracker, and she would have multiple backup teams positioned within response distance. Remember, Agent Chun said, we need them to actually attempt the theft before we can arrest them. Don't let them know you're law enforcement until they've committed to criminal activity. Sarah nodded. Understood. I've done undercover work before. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Sarah walked toward the equipment storage facility carrying a large duffel bag and backpack that appeared to contain valuable equipment and large amounts of cash. In reality, the bags contained training weights and prop money that would look convincing under casual inspection. She had been walking for less than 5 minutes when she spotted Murphy and 2 other Marines approaching from different directions in what was obviously a coordinated pincer movement. Her earpiece crackled with updates from the surveillance teams. Ghost One, this is Overwatch. We have 3 suspects converging on your position. Additional suspects in a civilian vehicle are positioned at the north gate. Sarah acknowledged the transmission with a subtle hand gesture and continued walking at a normal pace. She wanted the suspects to feel confident about their approach so they would commit fully to the criminal activity. Murphy stepped out from behind a building and blocked her path, just as Williams and his associates had done several days earlier. But this time, Sarah was ready with a complete tactical plan and extensive backup. Excuse me, ma'am, Murphy said with false politeness. I'm Staff Sergeant Murphy, Base Security. I need to ask you a few questions. Sarah stopped and looked confused, playing her role perfectly. Questions about what? We've had reports of someone carrying unauthorized equipment around the base, Murphy explained. I'm going to need to examine your bags to make sure everything is properly documented. The 2 Marines with Murphy moved to flank Sarah on either side, completing the same intimidation pattern that had been used against previous victims. Sarah let them position themselves exactly where they wanted to be while the NCIS surveillance teams recorded everything. I have proper authorization for all my equipment, Sarah said, reaching for her identification. That's fine, Murphy said. But I still need to verify everything manually. Please step over here where we can conduct the inspection properly. He gestured toward an isolated area behind the storage building, and Sarah allowed herself to be led to the location where previous thefts had taken place. She could see the civilian truck Murphy had mentioned positioned just outside the fence line with its engine running. Now then, Murphy said as they reached the secluded area, let's see what you've got in those bags. Sarah set down her duffel bag and backpack, giving Murphy and his associates a clear view of what appeared to be expensive electronic equipment and bundles of cash. She could see their eyes light up with greed as they examined the apparent treasure. This is some pretty sophisticated gear, one of the Marines observed. Looks like specialized military communication equipment. And quite a bit of cash, Murphy added. Is there a reason you're carrying this much money around on base? It's my combat pay from my last deployment, Sarah explained. I'm planning to deposit it at the bank on Monday. Murphy exchanged glances with his associates. Well, we're going to need to hold on to this equipment and money until we can verify that everything is legitimate. Base security protocol. How long will that take? Sarah asked. Could be several days, Murphy said with a predatory smile. Maybe weeks. These verifications can be very thorough. Sarah could hear Agent Chen's voice in her earpiece. That's enough. We have clear evidence of theft. Execute the arrest plan. But Sarah held up her hand in a subtle signal to wait. She wanted to get Murphy to implicate the larger network before the arrests began. Weeks, Sarah said. But I need this money for important family expenses. Isn't there some way to expedite the verification process? Murphy's smile became even more predatory. Well, there might be ways to speed things up. For a fee, of course. Call it an administrative processing charge. What kind of fee? Let's say 20% of the total value, Murphy suggested. That would cover our time and paperwork expenses. Sarah pretended to consider this. 20% is a lot of money. Are you sure this is official base policy? It's unofficial policy, one of Murphy's associates said. The kind of policy that makes problems go away quickly. Agent Chin's voice crackled in Sarah's earpiece again. We have everything we need. Initiating arrests now. Suddenly, the isolated area behind the storage building was flooded with NCIS agents and military police officers emerging from concealment positions. Murphy and his associates found themselves surrounded by armed law enforcement personnel with nowhere to run. NCIS, you're all under arrest, Agent Chun announced as she approached with her weapon drawn. Put your hands where we can see them, and don't make any sudden movements. Murphy looked around desperately, clearly trying to figure out what had gone wrong with their carefully planned operation. His eyes fixed on Sarah, who was no longer playing the role of confused victim. You, Murphy said with dawning realization. You're not just Navy. You're the one who set this up. Sarah smiled coldly. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Command. And you, Staff Sergeant Murphy, are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, money laundering, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. As the NCIS agents handcuffed Murphy and his associates, Sarah's earpiece crackled with reports from other arrest teams operating simultaneously across the base. Overwatch to Ghost One, came Agent Santos's voice. Williams is in custody and secure. The civilian truck at the North Gate has been stopped and searched. We recovered additional stolen equipment and arrested 2 civilian accomplices. Copy that, Sarah responded. What about the other bases in the network? Coordinated arrests are taking place at Camp Lejeune and 29 Palms as we speak. The store owner in San Diego was arrested an hour ago with a warehouse full of stolen military equipment. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched Murphy and his associates being led away in handcuffs. What had started as a simple confrontation with 3 Marines attempting to rob her had evolved into a major federal investigation that had dismantled a multi-state criminal enterprise. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached as the last of the suspects were being loaded into transport vehicles. Lieutenant Martinez, he said, I have to admit I was skeptical when you first proposed this operation. But the results speak for themselves. This corruption network was far more extensive than anyone realized. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied. But the real credit goes to Williams for having the courage to come forward with the truth. Harrison nodded. What will happen to Williams now? That depends on his cooperation during the trials and his willingness to make restitution to the victims, Sarah explained. He's facing serious charges, but his assistance in this investigation will definitely be considered during sentencing. Agent Chin joined them, carrying a box of evidence recovered from Murphy's vehicle. Lieutenant, we found detailed records of the entire theft operation going back 18 months. It looks like they stole nearly $500,000 worth of equipment and cash from dozens of victims. Have you been able to identify all the victims? Sarah asked. Most of them, yes. We'll be contacting everyone over the next few days to arrange for the return of their property and to gather additional evidence for the prosecution. Sarah thought about the Air Force Tech Sergeant Williams had mentioned, whose career had been damaged by false charges designed to cover up the theft of her equipment. Agent Chun, I want to make sure that anyone who was falsely accused or disciplined as part of this cover-up gets their record cleared and receives appropriate compensation. Absolutely, Chun agreed. NCIS takes these cases very seriously, especially when they involve false accusations against innocent service members. As the investigation teams completed their work and began packing up their equipment, Sarah reflected on how quickly the situation had evolved from a simple personal confrontation to a major criminal investigation. Her decision to handle the initial incident through informal channels rather than immediate formal charges had ultimately led to the discovery and dismantling of a criminal network that might have continued operating for years otherwise. Most importantly, dozens of victims would get their property back and see justice served against the people who had victimized them. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from the Air Force tech sergeant whose false charges had been dismissed and whose career had been restored. The letter thanked Sarah not only for clearing her name, but for showing that the military justice system could work properly when people were willing to do the right thing despite personal risk. Staff Sergeant Murphy was convicted on federal charges and sentenced to 8 years in military prison. Williams received a reduced sentence of 2 years in exchange for his cooperation and testified against all the other members of the network. Most of the stolen property was recovered and returned to its rightful owners, and several new security protocols were implemented across all the affected bases to prevent similar corruption in the future. Sarah's commanding officer commended her for outstanding initiative and professional conduct that had brought credit to Naval Special Warfare Command and the entire United States Navy. But for Sarah, the real satisfaction came from knowing that she had upheld the values of honor, courage, and commitment that defined military service at its best. She had proven that even in the face of corruption and criminal behavior, individual integrity and determination could make a real difference. The incident also reinforced her belief that the skills and training she had received as a Navy SEAL were not just for combat operations overseas, but could be applied to protect and serve fellow service members anywhere they were needed. As she prepared for her next deployment, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous, was not just part of her military duty, but part of who she was as a person and a leader. The 3 Marines who had attempted to rob her that morning near the equipment storage facility had learned a hard lesson about underestimating people based on appearance and assumptions. But, more importantly, their criminal activities had been stopped before they could victimize any more innocent service members. Sarah's story became a case study used in military leadership courses about the importance of moral courage and the responsibility that all service members have to protect each other from crime and corruption. Years later, when young military personnel asked her about the incident, Sarah would tell them that being armed for battle wasn't just about carrying weapons and knowing how to use them. It was about being mentally prepared to fight for what's right, no matter what form that battle might take. The real victory wasn't defeating 3 Marines in physical combat, but using intelligence, planning, and teamwork to achieve justice for all the victims of their criminal network. That was the kind of battle worth fighting, and the kind of victory worth celebrating.